Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Guildhall. We are starting in about 10 minutes, so please take your seats. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hello again. Can you please take your seats? We are starting imminently. Thank you. Great, stunned silence. Amazing. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to London Climate Action Week, which has doubled its size since last year and doubled the event size as well. And welcome to the Net Zero Delivery Summit in particular, hosted by the City of London Corporation at the historic Guildhall. What an amazing building to start the London Climate Action Week. My name is İrem Yerdelen, and I am Councillor and the lead member for Sustainable Finance at the City of London Corporation. And in my role, I provide leadership and support on corporations' ambitious sustainable finance agenda. I'm very honored to have you attending the Net Zero Delivery Summit. Also, I'm very honored to be your moderator for the day. We have prepared an amazing program, and this summit is midpoint between COP29 and COP30, and we will be focusing on how we progress the outcomes from Baku and how we can elevate the ambition towards Belém. As you all know, net zero transition, it's not just about the environment. It's about safeguarding our health, economy, and future. The longer we delay, the higher the cost will be, especially economically, socially, and ecologically. Today, we have an exciting agenda ahead, and over the next few hours, we will be exploring and debating the issues and approaches across nature, transition finance, carbon markets, and climate finance. So without further delay, I am starting the day with welcoming Right Honourable Lord Mayor Alderman Alistair King to the stage to start the summit. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the City of London. It's a joy to be here and a joy to be working to the Net Zero Delivery Summit, part of London Climate Action Week, driving progress and looking ahead to COP30. My name is Alistair King. I have the enormous honour to be the 696th Lord Mayor of London. It's a remarkable role that goes back to 1189, so 836 years. And even though it has this great history, it also has a remarkably modern set of objectives, and that is to be the global ambassador for the United Kingdom's financial, professional, legal and maritime services. I'm delighted to be here, but also I'm delighted to be here dressed in a normal business suit. A reason being is that just a few days ago I had to launch London Tech Week, and some of you may have heard about this. It was an enormous number of people came, and I was asked to welcome people at a big reception for London Tech Week. Sadly, the reception was timed just before one of the dinners at the for London Tech Week, where the Lord Mayor has to wear the normal evening wear that Lord Mayor wears, which is effectively an 18th century frock coat with a big lace jabot and a pair of tights. And it was therefore really quite wonderful to be talking about London as this epicentre for technological advancement, an incredible a whole series of extraordinary opportunities happening here in London, and it's extraordinary to be doing that whilst dressed like King Louis XVI. But we are gathered here today in the historic Guildhall, headquarters for 6 centuries for the City of London Corporation, the world's oldest elected local government, and the home of the United Kingdom's financial and professional services sector. This is the City of London Corporation's flagship sustainable finance event, and we are extremely grateful to our summit partners, the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the International Energy Agency. Huge thanks also to the summit sponsors, EY, Aviva and Intercontinental Exchange. And our thanks to you all here for being here and to support this crucial work. At this midpoint between COP29 in Azerbaijan and COP30 in Brazil, this is our chance to take stock of the progress made since last year and consider what more can be done this year to finance a sustainable future for the world. With the scale of the task and the scale of opportunity is vast for the private sector. The best estimates we have suggest that the world needs an annual commitment of $3.5 trillion each year to meet the targets that we have set for 2050. We know that governments will not be able to fulfil these promises alone. Private finance is essential to fund the transition to a renewable and cleaner energy future. But private finance itself cannot do it alone either. If the world is to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement, we need public and private finance to converge and to flow towards climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. To get there in time, we need to fast-track the transition to sustainable energy sources. So the financial sector, the most crucial sector of all in meeting these challenges, needs to think innovatively and to finance the needs to be integrated into the COP commitments and ambitions. That is why this year's summit will be leading the discussions on crucial issues such as carbon markets, transition finance, nature and climate finance. Across all these sectors, the private sector and the financial and professional sectors in particular, they have an absolutely vital role in turning COP outcomes into a reality. May I recommend to you our recent report, From Commitment to Action, tracking UK financial services sector's progress to net zero. This shares some of the details of what firms are doing and the progress being made here in the UK and in other financial centres, and it demonstrates how committed is this industry. My colleague Chris Hayward, the Policy Chairman, will be speaking more on the City of London Corporation's initiatives and how it's leading some of this vital work. The United Kingdom is uniquely positioned to support these endeavours. Given our role as a hub for sustainable finance and for technological innovation, a place where people come to find and to finance solutions for climate change projects all over the world. Whatever the political challenges, and there are with our international partners if we are to be successful in meeting our climate goals. We are delighted to be running this Net Zero Delivery Summit during Climate Action Week for the first time, and to welcome so many organisations who have travelled here to London in that spirit of collaboration and cooperation, which is what we all need. We look forward to a very international conversation with perspectives from all over the world throughout this summit. We wish all participants a very successful summit where together we can find solutions and to drive progress so the world goes into the next COP with the strongest possible position and a greater informed imagination. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Tim Gould, Chief Energy Economist of the International Energy Agency, who's going to follow me now. It's a joy to speak to you all today. I do hope you have a wonderful summit, and I hope to speak to you all during the course of today. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor, for that introduction. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge pleasure to be with you today in these magnificent surroundings, to give you a sense from the International Energy Agency of where we stand, at least on that energy component of the journey to net zero. And the first thing I have to say is that there is indeed still a long way to go. When we look at the numbers for 2024, energy demand increased by some 2%. And of course, if we are going to bring down emissions, we need to be meeting all of that incremental growth and then some with non-emitting sources. But when we look at the actual composition of how we met that growth in energy demand last year, the largest share was from renewables, so around 40%. Another 8% or so from an increase in nuclear. But that means that the majority of the growth in energy demand last year was nonetheless met by oil, natural gas, coal, and that's why we continue to see increase in annual emissions. But things are changing, and they are changing fast. We try and track all of the capital flows that are going into the energy sector each year. And we recently released our own sense of how much capital is going into the energy sector this year. And in our view, it's going to be around $3.3 trillion invested in different parts of the energy sector in 2025. And 2/3 of that is going to go to renewables, to nuclear, to grids and storage, to low emissions fuels, to improvements in energy efficiency, to aspects of end-use electrification, all of which help to move energy transitions forward. And when we look at the numbers for different parts of the sector, there are very important signs of change. 1 in 4 vehicles now being sold worldwide are electric. And when you look at deployment of 5 key low-emission technologies, so solar, wind, heat pumps, electric vehicles, nuclear, if it wasn't for the accelerated deployment of those technologies over the last 5 years, global emissions would be 7% higher, nearly 3 gigatons higher than there are. So we are making a real difference with the deployment that we're seeing. And one of the reasons for that is because, in the view of the International Energy Agency, we are moving into what we're calling the age of electricity, where electricity is the source that we will turn to meet an increasing share of our rising demand for energy services. And that's partly to do with industrial uses. A lot of it has to do with increased demand for cooling, particularly as temperatures rise. And we also have some new sources of electricity demand from mobility, from heat, and increasingly also to meet our thirst for data centers and artificial intelligence. But electricity is also the area where we have the most readily available suite of cost-competitive, mature, clean technologies. And more than 80% of the new electricity generation capacity that is coming into the system is coming from these low emissions sources. So in our view, there's huge opportunities here in the UK, across the world, to push further and faster with that agenda for clean electrification. And another reason why we're seeing that uptick in spending on clean energy transitions is because of the world we're in, this very energy insecure world that we have seen in particular since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but now also with intensifying conflict in the Middle East. And that has been an important driver for deployment of clean technologies. And that may sound a little bit counterintuitive, because you sometimes hear the view that if you're interested in energy security, you invest in fossil fuels. If you're interested in emissions reductions, you invest in renewables. But reality is significantly more complicated than that. And when we look at the data, when we talk to decision makers, we see that there are multiple motivations in play when clean technologies are brought into the system. Costs, questions of industrial advantage, air quality, of course, climate policies, but also we believe that energy security is an important additional reason to bring new technologies into the system. And that was a big theme that we picked up during a recent summit held jointly with the UK government on the future of energy security, held down the road in Lancaster House. And since 2022, we have seen a very rapid pickup in the pace of spending on energy transitions. And in today's insecure, low-trust world, I think that that preference for homegrown energy, particularly in fuel-importing countries and regions, will continue to be an important driver of change. Finally, a few words on elements that we see as lacking, the missing links in that journey from Baku to Belém, but also onwards towards a safer and more secure system. The first of those is related to that process of greater electrification. We are spending plenty of money in many countries on new sources of electricity generation. We are not investing enough in infrastructure. Grids are becoming an important bottleneck in many countries for cost-effective use of that clean energy capacity, but also an area where we would need to see increased attention if we are to avoid electricity security issues down the road. Secondly, on energy efficiency, we are within touching distance of that target agreed in Dubai to triple renewable capacity by 2030. In our view, based on what we can see today, we'll come in at around a multiple of some 2.6, 2.7 times. But we are a very, very long way away from the goal of doubling the rate of improvement in energy efficiency. That needs to be a much greater focus for the attention of policymakers, corporates, and the finance sector if we are to get on track for the goals agreed at COP28. A third area is the continued need for innovation and cost reductions, particularly in areas outside the electricity sector, sustainable fuels, CCUS, the deployment that we need to see for areas that are going to be difficult to electrify, notably in the large industrial sectors. Fourth is the need for much more attention to the resilience and diversity of clean energy supply chains, including critical minerals. That's an area where we have a very high degree of market concentration at the moment, and we need to be doing much more to diversify those supply chains and make sure that their energy transition is also associated with local value addition in many parts of the world. And finally, there is a profound imbalance in the way that capital is flowing to clean energy technologies. Around 80% of the investment is going to advanced economies and China. And as you're all aware, the majority of the global population lives elsewhere. 2/3 of the global population has less than 20% of the amount of capital going to clean energy. And it is those 2/3 of the global population who will see the most significant increases in energy demand in the coming decades. So if we are to make progress in a secure way towards a more sustainable system, we have to be thinking about building new bridges, new partnerships, to bring both domestic and international capital to emerging and developing economies. Now, that depends in part on governments, it depends in part on corporates, but it seems to us that a vitally important part of the dialogue on how that will happen is with you, with the finance sector, and we look forward very much to continuing our strong dialogue with the City of London, its leading role in many of these debates, to making that happen. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tim. What a great start to remind us all how important energy security and energy efficiency is. If I may try to summarize it in a short sentence, you talked to us about challenges on infrastructure in terms of the grid in particular. You talked to us about opportunity around electrification and how we can invest in these areas, and also innovation that will help cost reduction. And we will never be able to do it without the supply chain, and especially diversifying around the critical minerals. And we got the message, role of the finance sector and role of City of London Corporation. So thank you so much for coming and giving us the start for the summit. So now it is my honor to invite to the stage Sir Andrew Steer, KCMG, Distinguished Professor of Practice in Economics and Sustainability, Georgetown University and the School of Economics. Thank you, Andrew.
Wow, what a great start already. Thank you, Lord Mayor Alistair. Thank you, the City of London, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and others that have organized this. This is exactly what we need. You know, 33 years ago this month, I and some of you that are older may also have been there. I was in Rio de Janeiro for the Earth Summit and watched as heads of state walked across a red carpet and signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Biodiversity Convention. And at that time, even though it had been difficult to get there, at that time there was a feeling of incredible moral imperative. And we haven't always honored that, have we? There have been times when we have, Kyoto, Paris, certainly Glasgow in 21, but we don't always feel that sense now. But we need to recover it. Now, since Rio, we've had some huge changes in the way we think about these issues of climate. Originally, it was very much an environmental issue. Now it's an economic issue, and increasingly a human development issue. Back then, we thought the solution was public sector, public money. We now know that given the numbers we've just heard about, we need the private sector to play the biggest role. And the public sector and philanthropy and institutions need to help the private sector deliver. So that's why this meeting is so incredibly important. And that's why the City of London, the United Kingdom, must play a major role. And it's so exciting to see what is happening. As we just heard from Tim, we live in a good news, bad news world. You know, if you get 100 experts on climate change, and you say, how are you feeling? So roughly half of them will say, it's amazing. I mean, did you know when Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House in 1979, since then those panels have come down in price by 99.7%. Did you know that the price of battery storage has fallen by about 90% in the last 15 years? Did you know? And they'll give a whole set of did you knows. We're doing amazing things. Then the other half will say, we're lemmings, we're going over the cliff, we're seeing 1.5 in the rearview mirror, and we are on our way to a disaster. Now, they can't both be right, can they? Well, yes, they are. And the challenge for us is to hold these two truths that seemingly are inconsistent together. If we don't have that feeling of fear and dread, we won't have the motivation. If we don't have that feeling of hope and possibility, we actually won't get up in the morning to do what we need to do. So, look, I'd like to simply raise a few questions that I think will be necessary to answer if we're to be successful. Because, of course, the issue with finance is not that there's not enough money out there. There's plenty of money out there. It just isn't going to the right things quick enough. I, a long time ago, did a PhD in finance. If somebody had said to me, oh, the financial sector has a responsibility to address climate change and global issues, I would have said, you're crazy. Our job is simply to invest based upon risk and return. We're neutral. Well, of course, the financial sector hasn't been so neutral, has it? The financial sector actually is risk averse. They like doing things they've done before. Financial sector has high discount rates often. Therefore, they don't want to take the upfront investment that is required. And so there's some incredibly exciting things that are going on here, I believe. So question number one, will we understand the new economics of climate change? Back at Rio, there was a legitimate view. It was a trade-off. Nice to address climate change. It's going to hurt your economy, add to costs, probably lower your competitiveness. Then we had the Stern report 18 years ago, which said, actually, it sort of makes sense, because even though there's cost today, there are benefits in the future that are great. We now have a new economics of climate change, which says, actually, if you make bold and smart actions on climate change, you'll have more economic efficiency, you will drive new technologies, you will lower risks, and you will reshape expectations about the future. Those four things combined add to a dynamism that actually leads to more investment. And actually, Nick Stern's bringing out a new book in a couple of months, basically all about what he calls climate change as the growth story of the 21st century. Now, that sounds wonderful and rosy, but it's very important to remember, whilst strong action on climate change is good for a country, good for a society, good for the world, it's not good for everybody, certainly in the short term. There are losers as well as winners, and those include people and families that lose their jobs, and it's companies that actually it doesn't really make sense for. And it's important to distinguish the economics from the finance. Good economics doesn't mean the finance will also work. So the first question is, we need to understand the new economics of climate change. Second question is, will we get serious about learning about what the private sector really needs to play the role that we need it to play? And that's why, by the way, the Transition Finance Market Review and the new Transition Finance Council, which I know the City of London, the government is setting up, and I think Lord Alok Sharma is here this morning, and we're speaking later on, is so important. Because it's forensic, it's detailed, and it says this is what we need on policy, and this is what we need on de-risking, and so on. Last week I was in Copenhagen, where we convened 40 finance ministers from around the world who wanted to know how to build capacity so they could play the right role encouraging their private sectors and investors. And it was so exciting to hear from all around the world, ministries of finance taking it seriously. There are so many exciting examples out there. Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, take $1 billion of grant money and think very hard, how do you inject that carefully so as to encourage the private sector? There are no silver bullets. It's a jigsaw puzzle. The jigsaw puzzle needs to be put down very carefully. Question number 3, will we get beyond our disagreements? We in the environmental movement, and I'm sure there are several that would call themselves, we've focused too much over the last 50 years on what we're against and not so good about what we're for. And understandably, because originally the environmental problem was stopping pollution and stopping bad things happening. But the only way we're going to solve things is by doing more good things. And that requires a shift in approach. Take carbon markets, for example. We've been faffing around for far too long about, are you for it, are you against it? We now have a mechanism, we have ways of understanding all of the problems that were created over the last 20 years in carbon markets. We actually can solve them. We need to get on and do it. So too, we in the environmental movement, and actually in the government movement, have been so keen to consult, to put regulations on. There's an important new book, you may have read it, in the United States called Abundance by Ezra Klein. And what it basically has this wonderful example. California, for 3 decades, has been trying to build a high-speed train line from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And the current governor has basically said, can't be done. Just too much bureaucracy, too many requirements. During that time when in California we couldn't build a 500-kilometer high-speed line, China built 23,000 kilometers of high-speed line. We don't want to be China, but we sure would like some high-speed rail, wouldn't we? And so when we see last week India announced it's reopening 30 coal mines, and the reason is they cannot generate enough renewable energy to keep up with demand, we need to ask ourselves the question, why? And we need to do that in this country as well. Question number 4, will we bring people into the picture? We in the environmental movement have too often assumed that simply good policy in capital cities, or in the United States what's called the coastal elites, will work. But we've forgotten the fact that the transition we're talking about will lead to job losses, lead to massive job gains, but not necessarily for the same people, and almost everybody will have to do things differently in their workplace. We need to put that absolutely at the center. And countries are learning that. Recently, I was in South Africa. They closed the Komati coal generating plant very bravely, but they did it before they thought about what would happen to the workers. So massive opposition. Now they're investing hugely in a retraining program. They've slowed down their closures in order to give time to do that. Question number 5. Will we understand the present period for what it is? Progress is never linear, and it is a bit discouraging quite now. Remember in Glasgow, what was it, $140 trillion of assets under management were committed to net zero. I mean, my goodness me, we thought we'd nailed it. And now we've seen this huge erosion. But actually, as Generation came out a couple of weeks ago, they showed, yeah, they're not talking about it as much. They're not giving speeches about it. But actually, in most financial institutions that made commitments, they're actually doing it. Most corporations are still doing it. They're not doing it, quite frankly, as much as they need to. But, you know, progress is never linear. And the election in the United States changed a lot of things. It didn't change the law of physics. It didn't change the laws of economics. And that, of course, is why we're here today. Finally, question number 7. Will we have leadership that thinks big enough? There are thousands of great examples of things that are going well around the world, but they are not enough. We need leaders in the corporate sector, in the financial sector, in the political sector, in the NGO sector that think really big. For the last 4 years, I've been running the Bezos Earth Fund, which is a $10 billion grant facility in climate and nature. We spent a lot of time thinking about what it would take, and we proposed something called a deal team for the planet. Because if you go to the World Bank or anywhere, yes, they're working with the private sector, but they're not really soulmates. And what we need is soulmateness. And by the way, there's nowhere in the world better equipped to do it than here in the City of London. And finally, a story. A few years ago, my family and I went to Kenya to watch the wildebeest migration. 1.5 million wildebeests walking across the Serengeti and the Masai Mara. It's incredible. And my 13-year-old, we were watching them as they were crossing the Mara River, and these wildebeest were going down this incredibly steep slope. And the kids were getting lost, crocodiles were eating them. It was just absolute chaos. My 13-year-old daughter said, why are they doing that when we actually saw 2 miles down the road? We saw actually flat water where wildebeest were crossing and there were no crocodiles. Why do they do it here where it's so dangerous? So I asked a lot of experts why that is true. And they said, we don't know. But what we think it is because they've always done it that way. It's in their DNA. That is branded onto their brain that that's where they cross the river. And it got me to thinking, you know, why do we do certain things? Why do we run our economy a certain way? Why do we tax good things like work and not tax bad things like pollution? It's because we've always done it that way. And we need to change that. And we in this room have the power to do that. So I find this thrilling, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today.
Okay, wonderful. Another enlightening speech. Well, I think I can't summarize it in one sentence, but what I loved about it is the sort of two sides of the coin, the truth around 1.5, and then where we are currently, hope and despair, and the bold versus private, and ultimately bringing people and communities and the innovation into the picture. So thank you, Sir Andrew, for your remarks. Now, I think it's time to start our panels. So we have 3 panels today. First one will be related to nature. And I just want to say a few words before I invite the panelists on the stage, that we all recognize nature remains our most powerful ally in the fight against climate change. And nature reduces emissions, protect communities and help us adapt. Yet, despite its immense value, we still find significant barriers continue to impede the flow of capital into nature-based solutions and protecting of our natural environment. So this remains true in the face of even the huge potential that we recognize nature finance holds. And both globally and here in the UK, we all turn increasingly to expanding on this area and discovering some solutions. And especially in our City of London sustainable finance work, we have been talking about nature finance in some depth. Looking ahead, 2025 offers a real opportunity and a pivotal moment for advancing this topic during COP30 in Belém, given the location. And it is vital that we seize this moment and push the agenda forward. So in order to collectively rise to this challenge and unlock the nature's full potential, we put together an amazing panel. So I would like to invite our moderator, first of all, Kristin Teleki, who is the CEO of Flora and Fauna. And then we have numerous speakers. I'm just going to introduce them one by one. Panel, please come forward. We have Claudine Blamey, Chief Sustainability Officer at Aviva. Nicola Ranger, Executive Director and Professor in Practice, Natural Capital Risk and Finance at London School of Economics. Andrew Walton, Chief Sustainability Officer, Lloyds Banking Group. And Tony Goldner, Chief Executive Officer, TNFD. And if you don't know what TNFD is, now you will find out. Thank you for the panel.
Thank you very much for that terrific introduction, and I couldn't have said it better myself. What an opportunity. And I was just speaking to our panelists as we were preparing for our session. This is a really unique opportunity to bring nature at the beginning of a climate summit. I often find myself at some of these fora and COPs where nature is on the margins, or it comes at the end. And so this is a terrific opportunity, and hopefully we're going to tease out some examples, some things to inspire you, to take you through this week with thinking nature on the mind. And nature is important to all of us. I've had a number of conversations with some of you as we walked in, just how important nature is to you personally. How nature is important to you personally. And what does that mean for you? Not just your company, but what are you going to do about it and thinking about it? And I know all of you certainly in the room are thinking about that. I'd like to extend my thanks to the Lord Mayor as well. What a terrific opportunity to host an event like this in such an amazing institution here. And I also want to really thank our people that have joined us here, but also online. You know, we have an online community that will be watching us, which is also fantastic. Without a doubt, we're at a critical inflection moment, and you said that very nicely when you introduced this. We're halfway between COP29 and COP30. COP30 in the heart of the Amazon basin. Nature will feature very highly there. But it's also an amazing moment where nature is rising on the global agenda, both as a climate solution and an economic imperative. And I saw a number of you in the room here who were at COP16 in Cali in Colombia. There were 3,000 delegates from the business sector that were there participating. What an amazing opportunity. And I suspect many of them were starting to think, well, what role can we play? How do we find out more about nature and what can it play within our institutions? So it's no longer a side issue, without a doubt. It's central to climate, central to resilience, central to long-term value. And the numbers speak for themselves, right? You know, and the evidence base is huge. And I'm just going to give you a couple of them. But I guarantee if you Google, you ChatGPT it, if that's now a verb, to look that up, the evidence base is huge. Over half of global GDP, 44 trillion is dependent on nature. Nature-based solutions could deliver a third of the mitigation need by 2030. However, it just receives 3% of public finance. 3% of public finance. And what a return. Every dollar that is invested in nature restoration can return up to 30 in economic benefits. What a fantastic return. What's not to like about that? And so really, put it simply, investing in nature is not just good for the planet, it's smart economics. But it's more than that. Think about what nature does in terms of jobs, food, health, security, economic growth, and profitability. I mean, these are multiple wins that are coming from nature, and you're going to hear some more of this from some of our panelists here this morning. And certainly in my own institution, Fauna and Flora, we are a people and nature organization. We are a climate and nature organization. And you heard Andrew talk about that. Bringing people into the equation. There are going to be winners and losers, but we hope that we can find opportunities for all that are going to benefit us all going forward. But friends, we're not moving at the pace and speed that we should. Andrew just mentioned we need bold leadership. We need leadership of the brave, those that are willing to take risks and be ambitious. And given the decline of nature, which you're all acutely aware of, we need to be moving at that speed and pace. But this is why we're here. We are here to think about these and hopefully take some of these messages through this week. So from blended finance to scalable partnerships, and in today's conversation, we're going to really talk about how we turn ambition into action and how capital flows align both with nature positive and business outcomes. And so I'm really excited by this fantastic panel here and some of the thoughts and ideas, and they're really at the frontiers of this agenda. We're going to explore how to mobilize private finance, de-risk investment, embed natural capital into mainstream and financial corporate strategies. And this is going to really set you up well, I think, as I said earlier, set you up well for the week. Hopefully it'll inspire you, motivate you, and enthuse you. And I've asked each of our panelists, at the end, they're going to give you that one thing, that one idea, that one thought that you're going to take away with you as you go and navigate this week around climate and nature. So let's really get into this and kind of turn to our panelists. I'm going to turn to Tony first. Tony, you are the Chief Executive of the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosure. Launched 4 years ago. Fantastic. I can see it's really making penetration. I'm sure some of you are already active and involved with Tony and his team. But beyond the COPs, beyond the climate weeks, are we really seeing an engagement? I mean, I've talked about it here, and I've really pumped up the idea of nature and importance to climate, but are we really seeing it? Is it really coming through?
Your pumping up of nature is justified, Christian. I think, to paraphrase a comment that was made to me the other day by one of my task force members, what we're seeing is green hushing on steroids, was his phrase. Maybe I can focus in on nature hushing on steroids. I think there's a huge amount of work that's going on under the surface. Obviously, given the current political context, people are being cautious about what they say publicly. But I'm actually very encouraged by the progress and by the work that's happening. So, of course, at TNFD, we've built on top of TCFD with a set of disclosure recommendations. But we've actually gone further than that in providing an assessment tool, which we call the LEAP assessment. And I can tell you there are hundreds, probably thousands of organizations now around the world. Everywhere we go, people are doing a LEAP assessment, trying to figure out what their nature-related issues are within their organization. And that's both their impacts and dependencies on nature and what those impacts and dependencies tell them about potentially material risks and opportunities to their organization. So I'm really encouraged that there's a lot of assessment work going on under the surface, and whenever we do webinars and updates, we're getting 400, 500, 600 people online. We've also built on top of that and started to think about how we bring nature into transition planning, obviously alongside the net zero transition work that many are doing. And again, I'll just give you an anecdote. We had a session a few weeks ago just to update the market on what we've heard back in terms of feedback since we published a discussion paper at COP16 in Colombia last year. We had 2,000 people register for the webinar and 800 people join. So there's just a huge amount of interest in continuing to build the internal capacity, the internal thinking that's already well underway. So I'm very encouraged by that. And in terms of adoption on a voluntary basis of our recommendations, again, at the Nature COP in Colombia last year, we announced we had crossed 500 voluntary adopters and about 17 trillion in assets under management. I can tell you we're going to make another public announcement at COP30 this year, but I can tell you we're now well over 500, closing in on 600, probably closer to 20 trillion now in assets under management. And that's obviously all on a voluntary basis while the market waits for further guidance in terms of ISSB standards. And obviously in Europe, CSID is now being reconfigured. But people are getting on with the work, and I think the reasons why, it's very interesting when you ask them, why are you moving on this? And there's a number of reasons come through. One is we recognize it's in our own self-interest to understand how nature is a potential risk to our business, to our future cash flow generating potential. At the task force, we emphasize that nature's ability to provide those flows of benefits into your business model is linked to the company's ability to generate future cash flows. So we can think in very simple terms about how do nature flows drive future cash flows. And I think that message is starting to get through.
That's great.
So we're seeing a lot of progress in terms of both disclosure and assessment work.
Can I just do a quick poll? Hands up if you are either involved with TNFD or you're on the process or are thinking about it. Can we just do hands up? So good. I think about a third of the room looks like you're on your pathway to, and I really encourage you to have a look at this framework that provides an amazing amount of opportunities that I think are going to be there for to explore how you can engage more with nature. But we'll come back to you a little bit more on that, on Tony. Nicola, can I turn to you? You're sitting at the intersection point between finance, risk, and nature, and we hear a lot about that. When the discussion goes into nature, it's too risky, I'm not sure about it. And I guess what I'd love to have your more thoughts about is how can private finance better account for some of those financial risks? How these are risks related to nature loss and climate. And can you give a sense of some of your thinking and some of the experiences you've had when it comes to that?
Thank you, Christian, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So risk, I think, is the key word. So risk both in terms of financial risk, but risk also in terms of investment risk and how do we actually get finance to flow. So you mentioned at the start the sort of feel-good factor. Everyone sort of gets nature, but actually for us in this room, this is our jobs. Yeah. So we need to make it very relevant to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And that's really sort of the focus of our work, is about how do we really show this is hitting the bottom line. And you mentioned as well the 44 trillion global exposure to nature. I would argue it's actually 100% of our global economy. But actually that's not good enough in that, what is actually the risk to your business, to your balance sheet? And that's really what we've focused on. So we've sort of moved from we're very dependent on nature to actually what does this mean in terms of probabilities of default? What does it mean in terms of asset valuation changes? And what we can see there is very material risks. So, for example, we've worked with financial regulators in the UK and financial institutions in the UK, and we can see through those analyses that about 6 to 12% of UK GDP is at risk from nature loss. So, and this isn't about birds and bees and butterflies, this is about key ecosystem services on which our economy depends. And the industrial strategy came out this morning. I've been nerdily reading it in the background in the green room. And it talks about three things as priorities. It talks about stability, it talks about investment, and it talks about reform, transformation. Nature is barely mentioned in any of those three. So it gets a tiny mention, I think, in two places. But actually, nature is critical to all three. So for a stability perspective, I've just given you the statistics for the UK. We're now working with the European Central Bank. And with the European Central Bank, we published 2 weeks ago some analysis that shows that around 1.3 trillion in assets on loan books of financial institutions across Europe are at risk today from a 1 in 25-year drought, which is aggravated by nature. Today. This isn't a future thing. So these are real material risks. And then when you move to the opportunity side and the investment that the government wants to mobilize, again, there are huge opportunities in this area. And again, it's not, we often go to, this is about investing in conservation. Obviously, that's really important. But this is investing in sustainable business, sustainable supply chains, critical minerals. Our critical mineral supply chains are fundamentally vulnerable to nature-related risks. When you talk to people that work in this space, they see it on a day-to-day basis. Flows of lithium, for example, disrupted by water events, water scarcity affecting mines around the world. Tailings dams collapsing and that leading to shut down the mines. Huge vulnerabilities in our critical mineral supply chain. So actually there's an opportunity there for investors to say, if you're investing in sustainable businesses, this will give you competitiveness and it will give you growth. So this is fundamental. And I think from that last point on transformation and reformation that government is talking about as well, really this is a massive opportunity. It's the same as on the net zero side and energy. This is about transforming sectors to make them more resilient and more sustainable, and that is a huge investment opportunity.
Yeah, and you're hearing words commonality, right? You're hearing challenges, but you're hearing opportunities. There are massive, massive opportunities here, and we need to think about and reimagine the narrative, not thinking of birds, bees, and butterflies, but actually part of a country's infrastructure. You know, why wouldn't you want to invest in that? And maybe we turn to more some of the practicalities. I want to turn to you, Claudine, in terms of Aviva, right? And I think, you know, Aviva's been a leader at integrating sustainability and nature as part of your core business. And I know just from my own personal and professional experiences that you have some great examples of that. And perhaps if you could just, you know, give the sense to the audience here of what you see are some of the most promising or exciting innovations when it comes to climate and nature.
Sure. Maybe just start with a challenge, particularly coming from a kind of investment insurance sector, and then maybe a practical example and practical way we can do this, and then some opportunity. So I think challenge comes from the operating model at the moment and the system and the financial models not giving nature value, not the way it should. And the problem then is that we treat it as a free resource. So we haven't been able to incorporate that into investments. We even call it externalities. And until we stop calling them externalities and really internalize the costs, and I'm really encouraged by what you're saying, Nicola, is that's the way that we're going to be able to, as an investment sector and as an insurance sector, really be able to use that to be able to put money behind that. And then in terms of practical steps, so I think everyone should be integrating nature into their transition planning. Because, I mean, we haven't called our transition plan climate transition plan on purpose, because it has nature as a part of it. It has the just transition as a part of it. It's bigger than just climate. And we need to bring these issues together, because otherwise we're thinking about them in silos, and they'll start to, you know, you'll see all sorts of unintended start to come out of that, and we're already seeing some. But I am encouraged, actually, with what you've said as well, that I don't know about nature hushing. I think actually nature is being talked about everywhere I go. And partly maybe because we're talking less about net zero and climate, nature is actually rising above. And I think that's such an amazing, encouraging part of what's going on at the moment. And then an investment opportunity. So we see great potential in nature-based solutions for carbon removals. Why? Because carbon has a price attached to it. We need to attach prices to other bits of nature to be able to do the same. So we have a carbon removal fund. The fund is hopefully going to return about 8% annually for the long term, and that's what we're working towards. And it has afforestation in it. It has other nature projects in it that is increasing biodiversity. I think the thing is that when you do a carbon removal fund, it doesn't mean it only removes carbon. It increases biodiversity. It helps with health. It helps with flood risk and all of those issues that we're facing, both on the adaptation and the mitigation side. So actually, nature is so powerful, and there's so much opportunity.
Great. Good challenges there, but also opportunities, and wonderful to hear some of those experiences. Andrew, can I turn to you, Lloyds Bank? A major UK bank, and I guess the question to you is, how is Lloyds approaching the integration of nature and climate risks into lending and investment decisions? I mean, I think there's some challenges, but also opportunities when it comes to that. So maybe you could reflect on that a little bit, please.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking us. It is absolutely great to be talking about nature at the outset of this week. And for us at Lloyds Banking Group, we're the largest financial services provider in the UK. We're very UK-centric, about 98% UK-centric, so we take a particularly UK-centric view, but obviously contributing to the wider conversation is important. Look, I would associate myself with a couple of the comments that we heard. I think, Nicola, you're absolutely right that risk is the way to think about this, and in the City of London, That's a concept we get very effectively. I also fully agree with Claudine that talking about these things as externalities is where we go wrong. And so, again, I'll tell you a little about what we're doing to try and avoid that. But I think we are heartened by the number of our customers that are focused on nature. And I think, funnily enough, it's about 30% for our customer base, similar to the hands that were in the room, that have said they've got a nature action strategy, sometimes led by TNFD-related or aligned activity. We've done a LEAP assessment. We'd certainly encourage everybody else to do LEAP assessments. But look, we're a bank and an insurer. We're a bank assurance business, so our Scottish Widows investment business looks a lot like Aviva's. It has a huge insurance business, so insurance risk on nature-related risks is a huge part of our enterprise risk framework as we think about the things that are affecting our business. Obviously, tangible and demonstrable things like flood risk have been around for a long time, but there are more and more elevated associated insurance risks that are coming to the fore and are embedded in our systems and our pricing alongside that. And then on the banking side, we're a consumer and business banking business, about 28 million customers across the UK. And amongst our customer base, which is the largest in business and retail, we have about 30% of farming in the UK, and then about the same percentage for real estate, both house building and commercial real estate building. So we absolutely recognize that financing biodiversity loss has been a big part of our business for a very long time. We finance house building, we finance agriculture at scale. And we're facing into huge challenges, notwithstanding my optimism about how many businesses are beginning to really turn their head to this. There isn't an effective answer or real progress in agriculture at all. I think there's fantastic initiatives, and we may come on to talk about them later in this panel. But the nature challenges that our farming customers are telling us about, that are all interlinked, obviously, with climate, is the real reason why I think as we move to COP30, we have to align climate and nature as one conversation, which is happening and is great, because all of the challenges across our enterprise risk framework as we look at them are driven by both. So data and methodology is the challenge, as I'm sure everybody would always say. Again, I think people are making lots of progress in lots of great areas. Again, TNFD has been a fantastic driver of that. But in very specific areas like farming, again, we're driving greater and greater alignment towards an agreed way forward on data and methodology. Regulatory standards, it doesn't help when regulators move in and out of forcing financial institutions to put this at the top of their agenda. I think we have probably hit now, hopefully, a long-standing consensus position. And the regulators have got us to a better place, meaning that we can plan a way forward. And look, it's also sectoral complexity. That's the other challenge for us. I think it's a very different set of challenges from one to another, but the ones where we know we tend to focus, like most financial institutions, on where we think the biggest opportunity is to fix the problem. So for us, that's agriculture and housing, in the same way that for carbon, it's domestic boilers, cars, and also farming as well. So as we break it down, we think we can make progress in those areas.
Excellent. So you've heard a little bit about the what, and understanding a little bit some of the challenges and risks. And now what I want to turn now to is very briefly the how, and then we'll get to your final takeaway message, if I may. Tony, can I turn to you? I know that the other two-thirds in the room are sitting here going, A, what am I doing here when they're talking about nature, because I have no interest in it. B, they're thinking nature is too complex, there's not enough data, So what is your sort of 2 or 3 points of advice on how to engage as an entry point? Because, the recognition is that you want to start where people are, where companies are, as opposed to where we want them to be. Yeah. So maybe, Tony, could you just reflect a little bit on that and just give some brief advice to this group here?
Well, I just build on Nicola's point before. These risks are materializing now. They're hitting cash flows, they're hitting balance sheets, they're hitting investment portfolios now. In some cases that can be absorbed, but we know that the frequency and the magnitude of nature-related challenges is only going to get sharper and harder. And so our central piece of advice is to get started where you can get started. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. At TNFD, we're not saying you have to do all, or we're not in a position to say you have to do anything, but we don't even encourage people to say, try and do all 14 disclosures that we've recommended in your first year. And what we've seen from early reporting, and we now have over 150, maybe 200 first or second generation TNFD reports actually published, is that people are getting started where they can get started. They're starting on a particular business unit, they're starting in a particular geography, they're starting with particular issues that they've identified as potentially material, whether it's water stress or deforestation. So I think the central message is just get started with what you have. And to the point before about data, there has been this long-standing view, well, we can't do this because there's no data. There's actually, terabytes, petabytes of nature data out there. Yes, some of it's being collected for scientists, by scientists. It's not particularly useful for the market, but there are great tools that are out there. There is enough data to get going, and what we're seeing from the first generation of TNFD reports that have been published is people are generating decision-useful insights for their own business about managing the resilience of their own business more effectively, but also insights that are relevant for investors and other stakeholders. And so it is starting to change the conversation. I'm really delighted to hear the comments from my fellow panelists here about how it's coming into their conversations as financial institutions, because that's certainly what we're hearing. So I think it's about getting started. We're doing what we can to improve issues on the data side. We've proposed this idea of a global open access nature data public facility to provide a set of core state of nature data on an open access basis. We're going to be advancing that with specific recommendations at COP30 this year. We're also working on the opportunity side to help people understand when we talk about nature-related opportunities, what are we talking about? Not everything looks like a 7-year private equity 15 to 20% return profile. There's also opportunities to make your business more resilient in the face of accelerating nature loss. That has to be defined as an opportunity, not just the opportunity to make a decent financial return over a reasonable period of time. So there's lots going on, but I think the central message is get started with the tools that are available, and TNFD and others have provided plenty of those for people to start using.
Exactly, and not everything all at once. I think that's a really important message. You don't have to suddenly go from 0 to 60 and have everything nature. I think there's an incremental way, but starting you on a journey is absolutely fundamental. Nicola, I want to turn to you in terms of the sort of practicalities, and maybe just giving one or two examples, if we can, in the time we have left, about some initiatives that there are projects that you're involved with to give a real tangible element that you feel are shifting the needle when it comes to nature finance.
Thanks. Well, my job really is to give you the information you need in order to bring nature and resilience into what you do. So I guess a few examples is, one of the big things we hear about is where is the evidence on financial materiality? So actually this Friday with TNFD and Tony's team, we'll be publishing an analysis of 600 different evidence pieces on financial materiality of nature. So if you still think something's missing after that, please do come and talk to me. But there will be a database that will be released on Friday of a huge database of all of the evidence on financial materiality of nature, which is very much designed specifically to the evidence that we hear from you that you need at sector level and company level in particular. But for me as well, I think we often get confused between biodiversity and ecosystem services, because one of the things that we find is actually that ecosystem services data is what you really need. You need to know about water, you need to know about soil quality, you need to know about whether there's going to be pollinators, so what your investments in wheat are going to be operational, or sort of fruits and things. So that's the sort of data that we're trying to get. So we have a project with the European Space Agency called LEON, where we're looking at how to use available satellite data and other remote sensing data to bring it to your investment decision making. So we're working with the mining sector, we're working with the food sector, we're working with investors, we're working with banks, we're working with insurers, regulators to again, look at how do we take all of that data that's available, that we heard from Tony, and bring it to the decisions that you need to make. We're working with the UK government, with UKRI, designing scenarios. So we're working with the Climate Financial Risk Forum with the Bank of England and 40 financial institutions to design scenarios. So you have scenarios that you need to bring into your risk management. But actually the big thing that we hear, because we focus a lot on risk, is give us the opportunities. So, what we hear from, particularly from banks, we work a lot with banks, is, okay, you've told us about the risk, but how do we engage with our clients? Where are the opportunities? So actually, now we're really focusing on that, and that's the new initiative of Capital Nexus, which I recently joined the LSE to run, is to really look at that. So where are the opportunities? And particularly in areas like sustainable supply chains, which we see really significant investment opportunities in that area.
Fantastic. And I think just for everyone's awareness, LEON stands for Leveraging Earth Observation for Nature Finance. And a truly amazing initiative with big tech and science being applied to this is incredible. And I think it's a nice way to sort of segue to shift to you, Claudine, talking about Aviva and some of the impactful partnerships and initiatives you've been involved with, with the Wetlands Trust, the Wildlife Trust, and obviously recently LEON. And I guess, when you're trying to sell these internally, how are you thinking about some of these partnerships when you have to convince your executives that this is, good for business as well as the planet?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's been referred to already that we're in the insurance sector. And actually, insurance sector has been massively impacted by climate change. And particularly on the resilience and adaptation side, the doors are always open internally when you talk about this. So when we committed to 100 million for nature-based kind of solutions back in 2021, we've then gone about and brought some amazing partnerships. So we've given 38 million to the Wildlife Trusts. They are restoring temperate rainforests across the UK. We only have 1% of temperate rainforests left in the UK. And that's great for biodiversity. It's great for ecosystem services. It's also great for flood risk. And that's the kind of the theme that follows all the other donations that we've made as well. So WWT, it's about, I think, 250 hectares of salt marshes that are going to be restored across the UK. Salt marshes are amazing carbon sinks. And we are also working on the carbon code for salt marshes. But also, they are fantastic in terms of flood mitigation across the UK. And then we've worked with Woodland Trust as well. Similarly, it's a carbon sequestration project, but again, it has all the same themes. And I think what we forget is the social element of these as well, that people want to go to these amazing places and experience them, and it's good for health. So there's so many different values that these things add that we don't really think about.
And I love it. Again, you can see a common theme of bringing this is not just about biodiversity. I mean, Nicola talked about ecosystem services, but you're hearing health, food, jobs. I mean, there are wider elements here that are at stake, and the linkages, and we need to break down those sectors. Finally, to you, Andrew, and then I'm going to come back to a quick rapid fire to each of our panelists to give you that one takeaway. Just again, switching to hear some just more practical examples from a Lloyd's perspective.
Yeah, so we also have a number of projects that I would characterize as philanthropy in search of a commercial objective, but those are fine, they're exploratory. We'll get there. We do some great work with something called Projects for Nature, which is the DEFRA-run clearinghouse that brings together projects looking for funding for biodiversity net gain. I strongly endorse it, and please go and take a look at their website for options if you're starting out looking at options in this area. We also work with the Woodland Trust on ecosystem development with them, which has been great. But the one I'm really focused on is our partnership with the Soil Association Exchange. We've done a huge piece of work. It's about a sort of £10 million advisory process. We pay for our farming customers to go through a really detailed analysis of a whole series of metrics from soil nutrient quality to carbon to earthworm counting to, I mean, there's a whole swathe of them. And it's created across about 600,000 acres in the UK, a really fantastic baseline of data that helps a farmer, depending on the type of farming they're doing in the region that they're in, plot what the yield dip through to regenerative practices will be or is likely to be. And it can vary from 2 years to 9 years, depending on the type of farming. Analyzing that dip is the necessary starting point for our farmers to then say to us, okay, so now we need to be financed through the dip. And that's where the pilots we're doing with food producers, supermarkets, with other banks, we're doing some great work with NatWest at the moment. that financing that dip is the key thing for our farmers, and it's a really tangible business case to do it.
Excellent. So you've heard a few examples. It's sort of, I would say, these are appetizers to the main course for the later this week when you think about nature and bringing nature into climate. So now that we're come to our end of our session and our time together, Tony, can I turn to you? What's the one takeaway that you want to leave this group and people online with for the week?
I'll just build on the last comment and say I think there's enormous potential and opportunity in new models for financing the transition. So I think we've just scratched the surface of what's possible. We need to get the smartest minds from finance together with the smartest minds in nature science and come up with some new investment models.
So an exciting opportunity we're on the cusp of. Nicola.
Well, I was going to talk about the transition of finance as well, actually, and sort of just what I want you to take away from this is whenever you hear nature, investment, finance, don't think of it as financing conservation. That's only one part of it. Think of it as financing big transitions of sectors, transition finance to more sustainable business models. That's what this is fundamentally about, and that is where there are trillions of opportunities. Just critical minerals, 6 trillion. Agriculture, potentially, again, 6 trillion a year going into that area already. Huge, huge investment opportunities.
Yeah, and this is, and I'm sitting here as the head of a nature-based conservation organization. And we are looking at ways in which we are going to be able to deliver these outcomes for people. 80 to 90% of what we do is with local and community-based organizations in 48 countries around the world. What do those people ask us? They want more money in their pockets, they want more food on the table, and they want a safe place to live. And that could apply to anywhere in the world. And we need to think about those services. Claudine.
I'm so glad you asked me this. Because we are bringing a group of people together, big landowners, banks, insurance companies, data providers, to put on steroids how are we going to deal with climate mitigation with nature-based solutions in the UK. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about that, come talk to me.
Fantastic. Putting nature on steroids. I love that. Nature-based solutions. Fantastic. Andrew.
So I think it's estimated that for the UK to meet its nature restoration goals will cost about £56 billion a year. And this is one of the few rooms in the UK where I could say this, but that's not a big number. It's very achievable. And if we can get the right market frameworks, we can get the right capabilities moving, those sort of flows are not difficult to deliver. And at the moment, yes, of course, we're at entry level, but once we get going and once we've got functioning marketplaces, which I think are really, some great work is being done to bring them about, it's absolutely doable.
So some fantastic energy and enthusiasm for nature, without a doubt. You've heard about opportunities, and hopefully you heard more about the opportunities than the challenges. Of course there are going to be challenges. There's challenges with anything we do, but we really need to think about the opportunities that nature provides us. Not everything all at once. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good on your nature journey. Start asking some of those questions. There are lots of advocates, lots of science, lots of data out there to be able to get you think about that and get you on your journey. That could take time. They're not expectations that suddenly you're going to be a nature-based organization overnight, or that's going to be enter into your funding streams. No, not at all. Of course we'd like that, but that's going to take some time. And I would ask you to sort of two more thoughts from me. One is it's and not or. And not or. And think about that when you think about nature and people, climate and nature, not or. It does not have to be or. We often think about that too much. And one other theme that I really think is important to think about is, yes, this is a discussion in this room. Yes, it's a discussion at COPs. Yes, it's a discussion at Climate Weeks and the privilege of being here. But last November, or I guess it must have been October, my 17-year-old daughter at the time said to me, "Dad, why are you going to a biodiversity COP and then a few weeks later you're going to a climate COP? Surely you should be talking about them at the same place at the same time." And that's a very good question. And of course, one that we're all struggling with. But the point is that don't think for a moment that the next generation and others that are going to be your peers, your family members, your friends are not thinking about this as well. So as you go through this week, I encourage you, and I think all our panelists would encourage you as well, is to think about this how you come at that from your perspective. How can you incorporate nature into climate and some of the discussions that you're having, some of the actions that you're going to take. And so we really translate ambitions into action. And so with that, I thank the organizers for putting nature up front. That is fantastic. I thank our distinguished panelists and wish you well in the coming week as you talk about nature and climate. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you, Christian, for leading. Thank you, everybody, for your remarks. What I'm going to do is a very brief summary. Obviously, it has been a rich discussion, but what I have taken away personally is it has been really valuable, actually, to hear the reflections of both risks of ignoring the nature loss, but also opportunities that we will face when we are investing in it. So it's, again, the dilemma of both worlds. And then reflections on insurance, banking, how those indirectly impacts all other sectors. I think it was also great that the panel articulated the challenges that private finance is facing, but the progress in overcoming them around nature finance. We heard about bridging the internal investment silos between climate, finance, and risk divisions, also overcoming the perception that nature is too complex. Well, kudos, and I love the ambition on the database that is created for financial materiality around nature. It is fantastic to hear. We also heard a challenging global narrative out there. Obviously, TNFD is doing an amazing job. Thank you for being the leader in that space. And I imagine lots of people got courage to start from somewhere. Doesn't matter how complex where your current situation is. Start somewhere because risks are hitting the balance sheet now. And very good examples were given by Aviva and Lloyds. So really thank you for making it real. And we will all take away some of these reflections for the rest of the day. And you have given a great segue for transition finance, which will happen later on in our agenda. So now I think our brains are stimulated, so therefore we may need more coffee. We are now inviting you to have a short coffee break. We will be back at 10:30, so thank you everybody for your patience.
Hey. So, I've got a mic. Talking. So maybe you should be able to see me. Could you do a test call again? Because I think you should be able to see my audio coming through.
It didn't like the fact that the volume was muted, so I've got the headphone jack up.
Hey. Does it not show? Hey. So this is the correct audio, right?
I think so.
Oh, it's no suppression. That's right. Hey. Cool. So this is the audio. And then I guess, well, the question is for then when they're going to join, if we're going to see him.
Well, I'm really hoping that we can get him in before.
Yeah, that would be nice. Cool. Well, at least he's going to hear us, so that's good to know. So I'm getting the audio from...
Hi, everybody. I know the coffee is very tasty. Can you please take your seats? We are starting again. Thank you for your cooperation. We have a very tight agenda, therefore, please enjoy your coffees and teas at the table. Okay, we are getting there. Thank you, everybody. Final call. We are starting. Okay, almost there. Excellent. Okay, I think we can start. I'm just conscious of the time and individuals who are on the live stream. So we had an exciting start of our day, and we have a lot more to unpack. So it's my pleasure and honor to invite Chris Hayward, Policy Chairman of the City of London Corporation. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Chris, because we work really well together, and Chris has been an enormous supporter of City of London's net zero ambition and our sustainable finance work. So wouldn't do it without him. Thank you.
Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you, each and every one of you, for joining us here at the Net Zero Delivery Summit 2025, the fourth such gathering the City of London Corporation has convened. As Iram said, I'm Chris Hayward. I'm the Policy Chairman and the political leader of the City of London Corporation. And we come together, I suggest to you all, at a historic crossroads. For the decisions we make now will reverberate down the generations, shaping the ecological and economic inheritance of our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And, of course, the viability of human society as we know it. President Kennedy observed once that the supreme reality of our time is the common vulnerability of this planet. And the decades since this statement have only, in my view, compounded its truth. Our age has been characterized by profound shifts in everything from technology to economics and geopolitics. But the climate crisis, with its capacity to reap unprecedented disruption, must count among our most pressing and indeed urgent challenges. And so today, I re-emphasize our commitment to action, doubling down on sustainable finance as the only way to accelerate the net zero transition and as a crucial means of spurring our national growth. More than an environmental imperative, attaining net zero is also a strategic economic opportunity. For the economies of climate mitigation and adaptation have not changed. While climate action will generate economic value, inaction will destroy it. Since 2000, climate change has caused more than $3.6 trillion in damage. And the World Economic Forum estimates that without action soon, global GDP could drop cumulatively by up to 22% before the end of this century. From shipping to insurance, from energy to agriculture, forestry to fishing and pharmaceuticals, no industry will go unaffected by the climate crisis. And changes in governmental policy around the world won't change that fact. As the global economy comes to recognize the risks and realities of this crisis, sustainable finance has emerged as the standout opportunity. And as the sands of global power shift, it's an area in which British leadership endures, internationally recognized and respected. Significantly, it's an opportunity that plays to many of the United Kingdom's established strengths. A global challenge then, but one which the UK can help address through the provision of sustainable finance. And in so doing, drive our national growth and further reinforce the competitiveness of our financial and professional services sector that I speak for. Our message, therefore, must be that the costs of ignoring the climate crisis are unthinkable, but that the opportunity of financing the delivery of net zero goals is transformative. In a case set out in the City Corporation's landmark Vision for Economic Growth, and most recently in our report From Commitment to Action, which tracks UK financial services commitments on net zero. The data, ladies and gentlemen, is clear. In the number of financial services firms with validated science-based climate targets, the UK is world-beating. But to maintain our sustainable finance leadership, we must continue to champion innovation and work to build a market with integrity. Now, sustainable finance is, I know, a broad term, but we see 4 key interrelated areas as especially primed for growth and innovation, each of them critical to the broader goal of the net zero transition. These are, firstly, transition finance to enable industry's shift to net zero. Secondly, carbon markets to direct finance into activities and assets which remove or prevent carbon from entering the atmosphere. Thirdly, nature finance to promote ecological capital as the guarantor of so much which enables human society to thrive. And of course, finally, climate finance to ensure that emerging and developing economies, so often the worst affected by climate change, have the resources to both mitigate and adapt. And in each of these elements of sustainable finance, the United Kingdom is a key leader, but progress must be accelerated. In the transition journey, we have to bring everyone along, including and especially those in hard-to-abate sectors. Transition finance has proved indispensable in this effort, and it's a market poised for significant growth. Indeed, McKinsey estimates that the transition to net zero could be worth more than £1 trillion to UK companies by 2030. The groundwork for the UK to reinforce its leadership in this space has already been laid. The Transition Finance Market Review, whose secretariat the City Corporation was pleased to host and co-lead, has produced recommendations which we are already implementing. Prominent among these, I commend to you the work being undertaken by the Transition Finance Council, which we were delighted to launch and host alongside His Majesty's government. Let me also, if I may, just take a moment, this moment, to pay tribute to Lord Alok Sharma, joining us here today in his role as chairman of that Transition Finance Council. Thank you, Alok, for all you are doing to support us. And gratitude is also due to our very own Iram Yerdelan, my lead member for Sustainable Finance and Deputy Chair of the Council, who is facilitating today's event. She works so incredibly hard and with such passion and diligence on these issues. I'm indeed very lucky to have her in the role. So we're proud, ladies and gentlemen, to be the partner of choice in the City Corporation for government as it works to support the UK's preeminence as a transition capital centre. And to the private sector, I say this: we'll be your partner too. If you want to raise and deploy finance for the net zero transition, then we want you to come to London. But while the transition can be accelerated, it cannot be instantaneous. As companies still emit, carbon markets have a vital role to play in offsetting and compensating. The efficacy of financial trading systems in other areas of our economy is clear. Clear too is the enormous potential of carbon trading. It's a market that has faced challenges in the past, but much needed clarity has arrived, both internationally through COP29's Article 6, which operationalises the framework for an international market, and domestically through the government's publication of its 6 principles for voluntary carbon and nature market integrity. Now, we must convert this clarity, ladies and gentlemen, into action. It's time to scale this market and build on the extraordinary innovations being championed in the United Kingdom. From launches of exciting new carbon removal funds to pioneering insurance offerings and a growing nature-based solutions and engineered removals market. And with its unrivaled financial infrastructure, deep and well-connected capital markets, culture of innovation and record of leadership in sustainability, the City of London has a vital role to play in other key areas of sustainable finance, in both climate and nature finance, which I look forward to discussing with international counterparts at COP30 in Brazil, the City of London Corporation will do all in our power to mobilise the private sector. We cannot allow the world's store of natural capital to be continually depleted, nor can we afford to neglect our partners in emerging markets as they work to protect their economies from climate chaos. As with so much else, it's action here that will secure and safeguard progress. And we too have acted here at the City of London Corporation, adopted in 2020 our ambitious climate action strategy, led by my colleague and lead member, Alderman Alison Gowman, another champion of climate action, will see us achieve the net zero emissions from our own operations by 2027, as a step on the journey to net zero across our full value chain and investments by 2040. Ultimately, this work will support our commitment to a net zero square mile by 2040. The City of London is both a global city and an engine of national growth. And the dimensions of the net zero transition mirror this, a global challenge offering national opportunity. In exporting our expertise and mobilising capital for a sustainable future, the United Kingdom can drive its national prosperity and its competitiveness. The time is now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been hearing that call to action for decades. Inaction is no alternative, and the targets we have set as a global community are slipping away. So I call on all participants in this summit to deliver the action necessary to save our planet. I know that it will produce economic prosperity. Thank you. And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker to you, an individual whose career spans climate action, economic strategy, diplomacy, entrepreneurship, and technology. So I'm delighted to welcome to the podium Singapore's first ambassador for climate action and senior advisor to the National Climate Change Secretariat at the Prime Minister's office. Ravi Menon, please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I think Chris Hayward has provided us a very good overview of the issues relating to transition finance, setting the stage for what I can share with you over the next 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, transition finance, especially in the developing countries of the world, remains severely inadequate. We are still about $1.5 trillion short each year of what is required to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Public capital is willing, but not sufficient to bridge the gap. Private capital is sufficient, but not willing to take the risks. Why is transition finance not flowing at the scale and pace needed? One, the cost of capital is too high, which means the real or perceived risks are high. Two, the carbon price is not high enough. Today I want to talk about two key levers that can unlock transition finance, the transition finance that's necessary for global decarbonization. First, blended finance to address the cost of capital issue. And two, carbon credits to address the lack of a carbon price. Blended finance is about synergizing public, private, and philanthropic capital to make transition projects bankable. Today, Too much public capital, be it from sovereigns or multilateral development banks, is going into bankable projects that private capital can finance. In a sense, it's almost crowding out. A far more effective use of scarce public capital is to help reduce the risk of marginally bankable transition projects and attract multiples of private capital to these projects. In short, public and philanthropic capital should aim to be catalytic, not duplicative. Blended finance uses a combination of catalytic capital and technical assistance to catalyze private commercial capital. Catalytic capital or concessional capital could be in the form of grants, guarantees, or financing at below market rates by public sources or philanthropic sources. Very importantly, by helping to absorb first loss risk in these transition projects, it improves project bankability, thereby attracting private commercial capital. Technical assistance in the form of project development expertise, capacity building, and institutional support also help to reduce risks, strengthen confidence, and improve bankability. So the key is to improve the bankability of the many transition projects that today go unattended to in the global south. This is why Singapore launched a blended finance platform called FASTP, or Financing Asia's Transition Partnership. FASTP will support green and transition projects in Asia, from phasing out coal and strengthening grid infrastructure to electrifying transportation and decarbonizing industrial processes. The Singapore government has pledged $500 million as concessional capital to be matched dollar for dollar by other sources of concessional capital from other sovereigns and philanthropies. The aim is then to use this $1 billion base of concessional capital to crowd in 4 times more private capital for a total fund size of $5 billion. FASTP has to date attracted both sovereign and philanthropic funds, which in turn has motivated banks and asset managers to come on board. FASTP is making good progress towards its $5 billion target and looks forward to making some announcements at COP30. The second key lever to unlock private finance for transition is carbon credits. Speakers before me have spoken about this. Carbon credits are a market-based solution to bridge the financing gap, particularly when policy and economic incentives are lacking. On the supply side, carbon credits are generated by mitigation activities that reduce or remove carbon emissions. And if not for the revenue generated from these credits, these activities would not have occurred. Now, on the demand side, entities may want to purchase such credits to help their hard-to-abate residual emissions. This convergence of demand and supply creates a win-win situation globally. For developing countries where financing needs far outpace available resources, carbon credits create an additional pathway to fund critical mitigation projects. For sovereign and corporate buyers, many in the advanced economies, credits offer a transparent and credible way to meet emissions reductions targets. Yet we all know carbon markets have not been functioning well. On the supply side, there have been valid concerns about the environmental integrity of some of the carbon credits being generated. On the demand side, there is also a lack of consensus regarding how businesses can or cannot use credits to meet their net zero targets. But we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to tackle these issues comprehensively and in close partnership. And I'm happy to say that this effort is underway. The supply-side integrity issues are being addressed systematically. There is now growing consensus of what a high-quality carbon credit looks like, thanks to Article 6.4 concluded last year, ICBCM and Corrêa setting global standards. The World Bank has been providing technical assistance and capacity building for carbon projects in many developing countries to make sure that the credits generated are of high integrity. Singapore has been working with partners to promote high-integrity transition credits. This is a new class of carbon credits to channel finance towards transition projects. A good use case of transition credits is phasing out coal in Asia. Most of the coal-fired power plants in Asia are young and have an operational lifetime of at least 30 years more, making early closure or immediate shutdown commercially unviable. But if they are left operational for the next 30 years, these plants alone will exhaust 2/3 of the carbon budget that we have remaining to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what's the solution? You can't let them go on indefinitely. You can't shut them down immediately. Well, you can think of providing incentives for the early retirement of these coal plants, replacing them with renewables. If we can generate transition credits from the emissions reduction that's attributable to the early closure of these coal plants, we can finance the managed phase-out of coal in Asia. And let's not forget, 1 out of every 6 tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere today comes from these coal plants in Asia. Singapore is working with partners to test the feasibility of transition credits. We're doing so with 2 pilots involving coal-fired power plants in the Philippines. We hope that sovereigns, companies, and standard setters recognize the potential of transition credits and work together to stimulate demand for such credits. So that's the supply side. Now, on the demand side, Singapore has signed agreements with 7 other countries to buy carbon credits compliant with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. As an added demand incentive, carbon tax liable companies in Singapore can offset up to 5% of their taxable emissions using Article 6 compliant carbon credits. So when the government and carbon tax liabilities in Singapore purchase these credits, they are contributing to decarbonization efforts in our partner countries. But demand for compliance credits alone is not enough to resuscitate the carbon markets. We need to reignite demand for voluntary credits too, to generate the financing needed for decarbonization in the global south. Governments need to step in to encourage strong voluntary demand for carbon credits. Following the UK's lead, Singapore published last week guidance on how companies in Singapore can use carbon credits alongside a credible decarbonization plan. But it's not enough that just the UK and Singapore governments do this. More countries need to step forward to provide guidance on the use of carbon credits. Our 2 countries have been engaging partners and look forward to announcing the fruits of our efforts tomorrow. Let me conclude. Today, our bandwidth and attention span is being caught in a variety of current immediate challenges. Political support in many countries for climate action is wavering. The economic environment globally is highly uncertain, not to mention geopolitical risks rising. But let's not forget, these are not reasons to delay climate action, because the timeline is not set by business cycles, it is not set by electoral cycles, it is set by nature. And nature is suffering. The planet's timeline will eventually impose its will on us. The question for us is, will it be a disorderly, hurried transition 10 years from now, or can we do things more systematically in an orderly fashion so that we can manage the transition better? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we had 2 excellent speakers to kick us off for the rest of the afternoon. We still have got a lot to cover, and what I want to say is thank you to Ravi Menon to bring that aspect from the other side of the world, where we hear a lot about just transition and we worry how this is all going to land. But I think now we are going to turn into our second panel to even dive deeper for this topic, transition. And I just want to say a few words before I invite the panel. Firstly, the global shift to low-carbon economy represents tremendous opportunity, not only to address the climate crisis, but to drive long-term sustainable economic growth and resilience for generations to come. This holds true here in the UK, but also globally around the world. Transition finance is a particularly important topic which is close to my heart. And as Chris Hayward mentioned at the City of London Corporation, we launched in partnership with His Majesty's Government the Transition Finance Council earlier this year. And we are quite ambitious. So I have the privilege to be the deputy chair of the council. And we are basically trying to advance and oversee the implementation of the market review that Vanessa Howard-Williams chaired last year. And we are making progress. I'm very excited about the discussion paper and the call for evidence that we will be launching later this week, so please stay tuned. And also we are very ambitious about what's coming ahead, so we will have a September showcase about the Council's progress, a 6-month progress, so we will invite you all to that as well. So now it's my honor to invite the chair of the Transition Finance Council, who I work closely with, Right Honourable Lord Alok Sharma, to the stage, and then the panel who will discuss transition finance issues are Jill Lofts, Global Sustainable Finance Leader, EY, Natalie Blight, Global Head of Sustainable Finance and Transition, HSBC, Alistair Phillips-Davies, Chief Executive Officer of SSE, and Satoshi Ikeda, Financial Services Agency, Government Representative of Japan. Thank you, Alok.
Great. Well, Iram, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's a privilege and a joy, actually, to be working with you on the Transition Finance Council, so thank you for that. Thank you all for coming, and the great thing about this panel is that I don't have to answer any questions, which is the normal thing. I get to ask them. So, Alistair, maybe start with you. I mean, we just heard Ambassador Menon talk about the geopolitical challenges that we have, whether we're going to have a disorderly or an orderly transition. There's a lot of headwinds. What's happening in terms of the energy transition?
So I think you're absolutely right. Geopolitically, we can wake up every morning and see something new and different. And obviously, we even saw some of that over the weekend. I was delighted to wake up this morning and not see oil and gas prices having spiraled away. People are going to wait to see what happens in the Middle East. I think on the energy transition, through a lot of different things going in different places, I've got more direct knowledge of UK and Europe. I think it is a bumpy ride. It's non-linear in terms of what we're seeing, but there are some big facets there. Essentially, the science is still there. The science is indisputable. At the end of the day, equally, I think electrification is just coming. It's just happening. We're seeing more and more of that. Governments have to wrestle with affordability, security of supply, particularly in these kind of environments. They've got to wrestle with climate change as well, and they're looking for growth and economic benefit out of all that. And I think that can still be done, but we are definitely in for a slightly bumpy ride in terms of where we end up. So we've seen, for various reasons, and essentially supply chain, that the lack of the peace dividend and the war, particularly between Ukraine and Russia, massive disruption of supply chains pushing up costs. You've seen required returns that many people will know about, risk-free rates and things of that nature coming in, and that has really disrupted projects in certain areas. So renewables projects have definitely gone backwards. Some of the things like carbon capture and storage, and where we're looking for flexible, low-carbon green, have gone backwards, whereas networks are really coming to the fore at the moment, where they've got regulated, sustainable models where you know you can recover costs. Network build-out has been strong. So I think it's patchy in different areas of the world. You've seen China move to being the biggest deployer of renewables technology anywhere. You've obviously seen the US pull back, but that's for a period, and that's very economically driven. They can frack, and the rest of us can't. I think the big challenges for Europe are how do we rewire our energy system to avoid some of the implications of importing large amounts of fossil fuels that, with the exception of Norway, we don't have, and make sure that we take control of what we've got. We don't want another energy crisis where we're suddenly seeing 30, 40 billion pounds a year exported overseas, and we want to build a system of the future.
Great. So, I mean, just to, on this point, so basically what you're telling us is that the long-term decarbonisation trend, electrification trend is there. Then it may be bumpy, sort of along the way. But tell us in the short term, I mean, is private finance actually there? Because there's, I mean, you will know from your role that, you know, it certainly even in the UK context, it's been quite bumpy recently in terms of the commitment of private finance. How confident do you feel that private finance is still going to be there?
So I think private finance absolutely is there. We're the biggest issuer of green bonds in the UK. We remain there. We did our 9th one a little bit earlier this year, but still in, you know, turbulent markets. That was another 600 million euro hybrid financing that we did at that point. We've been out with shareholders just in the last couple of weeks on the back of our results. If you've got strong results, if you've got discipline about projects, and it's about that discipline on projects. So how do you put together projects that aren't going to end up in trouble where you've got the issues, let's say, of Thames Water, where bondholders are wondering whether they're going to see money. If you've got projects where there are good returns, and obviously one or two people in the sector have really suffered with their share price, but you've got a lot of others where there is discipline. We're having to rework our projects, work harder, and that's why I think coming up you've got the next offshore wind round. That will be critical. How much money is actually coming from that? You've got Ofgem coming out in this country with what are the returns going to be on what will be the biggest build of transmission in almost a couple of generations. For us alone, it's over 20 billion over 5 years. I think I see governments from the Netherlands to Denmark going back looking at, well, do we have to put some more subsidies or some more regimes in place to help make sure that we can build these different assets? So I think all of those things are happening and people are responding. Policymakers and regulators are responding to what's required, but it is just bumpy and we have seen a bit of a hiatus.
Okay. I'm going to come back on electricity prices, particularly since the government's published its industrial strategy this morning, focusing on electricity prices. But Julian, maybe I can turn to you, which is, you know, EY has been working very closely with the TFC, the Transition Finance Council, and looking at basically how much transition finance is actually being deployed. So can you tell us how much money is actually being deployed? Where is it being deployed from? And which jurisdictions is it going into? And particularly, I think, give us a sense of you know, how much of this is going to hard-to-abate sectors as opposed to you know, technologies that are already commercially viable.
Sure, thank you. I suppose I'd start off by saying we have heard quite a lot of numbers this morning quoted. I guess we feel it's important to baseline initiatives, to look at the velocity, to look at the gap, etc., etc. And obviously, the discussions that we've been having with the TFC have been along those lines of, let's find a baseline that we all feel relatively comfortable with, and then we can start to measure the progress that we're making. And we've done that in other fields, like blended finance, etc. So I think, for me, the sort of idea of quantifying something, understanding it, and seeing, you know, therefore, where are the bits that we really need to take some action are quite important. So the data that most closely matched the TFMR work was the Bloomberg New Energy Finance data. And so we've been obviously working with yourselves and with them on analysing what does it look like. So we reckon it's about, for 2024, about just over 2 trillion globally, with clearly China leading quite significantly at 118 billion, which is about 4.5% of their GDP. UK's fourth, which is very good news for the UK, at around 65.3 billion, which is about 1.8% of GDP. And of course, US, you'd expect, is second at around 338, which is just over 1% of GDP, and Germany's third. So I think from a UK perspective, very well positioned on the global stage. Debt is the major part of that, so that's about 64%. And interestingly, equity has fallen quite significantly over the past 3 years. So I think highlighting the ways in which corporates are raising the funding for the different, decarbonisation initiatives. To which regions? So the data that we had from banks from 2023 in the UK suggests that that's about 54.8 billion was raised for clean tech. Most of that went to Europe and the US, as you'd imagine, with only 2 billion out of that 54 going to emerging markets. So that shows quite a significant gap. And then when we look at kind of the types of financing, which sectors, this isn't great news, I'm afraid, 93% going to mature technologies like grid, like clean energy, like electric transport. Obviously only 7%. And in the UK, we mentioned it a little bit earlier with nature and agri. But of that 54 billion UK banks, only 2 billion went to agriculture in the UK. So quite a significant gap there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. So, I mean, I think some sort of positivity to take from that, but obviously still a long way to go. So, Natalie, I just want to pick up on this whole issue of financing from an HSBC perspective. Can you, I mean, two questions really. One is, can you give us a couple of examples of where HSBC has financed a hard-to-abate sector? And, you know, maybe that's not in the UK, and you think, well, actually, that's a great example, that's applicable more internationally. And the second point, just to pick up on this piece, Natalie says, that Julian says, that money is moving, but actually it's really not moving very much at all in developing economies in the global south. So when, as a global bank, you look at financing, do you have a different lens through which you look at developed country financing as opposed to developing country financing?
Okay, all right. So first of all, what I can say is that we had our record year last year, actually. So we did 99 billion of sustainable finance, supporting our clients' transition. And we are absolutely doubling down on the commercialization because we see this as a huge opportunity. That's why I have my role. To get specific around where did that 99 billion go, we're really looking at three critical drivers. One is those critical industries for transition, clean power, electrification of transportation, and the data centers, actually. There's no smart grid without data and data centers. Being that trusted transition partner for all our clients, as you said, including in the hard to abate. So I'll come on to an example, and then I'll explain what makes these investable and bankable. And then the climate tech that we were talking about as well. Climate tech actually is, we're really focusing on the nascent stuff. So we've got $1 billion to deploy there. So you can see it's actually in our profile rather smaller in terms, but it has more impact. Bringing some examples to life and why they're bankable. The one I really like, I'm born in Sheffield and brought up in an environment around steel, very up and down industry globally. It's in Sweden, actually, SSAB. Huge numbers here, billions, to bring an old-fashioned, huge emissions steel mill to state-of-the-art fossil-free using a couple of electric arc furnaces. It reduces their emissions by 90%, the whole of Sweden's emissions by 7%, improves their operating costs and their financial terms, the commercial reality for there. So you get this really nice sweet spot. But we couldn't do that without collaboration and support, whether it's ECAs, guarantees, grants, etc. And then closer to home, but that's a hard-to-abate sector. You know, a few years ago, people were saying, not possible.
Absolutely.
Is possible. So billions are going into this one, and we should cookie cutter that and take it around the globe. And then closer to home, closer to where my real home is, the Teesside. For years now, with government support and initiatives, what we've got there is what I would call foundational infrastructure on the carbon transport and storage in the Northern Endurance Partnership. I think that's a few billion. We've also got the net zero Teesside, which is a gas-fired plant with carbon capture. Now, I know some people will feel, well, we shouldn't be doing that. We need all the tools we've got, because you've talked about how bumpy and non-linear this is. So another few billion. Again, what collectively made these investable for banks is that balance between sort of risk and reward and returns, and getting the sort of the governments aligned. We need to have policy, legal, investment frameworks that work. We need to know where governments want to do what and when. We need sort of support, guarantees, ECA-backed, etc. And then in the emerging markets, you were talking about that, it is different. I mean, banks judge the returns and the sort of the risks. They're balancing that. That doesn't change. But the profile of the risk change. And therefore, we have to sort of take that in consideration. And critically, in the emerging markets, you also have quite small deals, quite fragmented deals. So what we need is a system where we can aggregate them and diversify and spread that risk and make them sort of investable as well. And then I'm really hopeful.
So you're thinking of some form of securitization, then, are you?
Sort of the stuff we've done with Pentagreen and Temasek to sort of pull lots of sort of smaller deals together so that an investor sort of can come in upfront and sort of spread the money out. But I'm really hopeful because you're absolutely right. There have been blockages to the appetite for private investors going into the emerging markets around infrastructure. But this sort of great transition that is needed could be the once and for all opportunity to sort of solve that with these sort of frameworks and support.
Okay. So Virgie, thank you for joining us online. Hopefully you can hear me. If I can just turn to you, just picking up on this point about emerging markets. Obviously, the Japanese government has been pretty focused on promoting transition finance and sort of working with other countries in the region. Can you give us a sense of basically what are the learnings that you've had in Japan, and talk a little bit about how you may be applying that to other markets, particularly in Southeast Asia?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. Well, first of all, I would like to talk about the issue of green transition of the steel industry, building on what Natalie said, because at the end of the day, that certainly risk return formula applies to the financial institutions in general, but it also applies to the business companies. And so in designing the transition finance, there should be a certain risk return justification for climate transition at the side of the financial institution. But at the same time, business institution or business firms need to find their own risk return justification for doing so. And taking the green steel as an example, green steel is made of the green materials or green process of manufacturing steel. But at the end of the day, that the function as a steel is the same as brown steel. So who would buy green steel with a higher cost? That is a very much question. So it is very important to put in place a kind of enabling environment for financial institutions and businesses altogether. And in that sense, we believe that the carbon pricing mechanism or emission trading system is very much critical. So that the kind of greener steel would be rewarded in terms of the carbon pricing scheme. And so that applies to the overall Asian context. Of course, the Asia faces a tougher challenge because their starting point is the huge use of coal-fired power plant, coal energy. So they need to fundamentally transform their energy system and associated kind of a manufacturing system because at the end of the day, that the Asia has attracted the kind of hard liability sector from other parts of the world, including US, although US now wants some of them back to their home. But so designing the proper energy transition journey With a combination of certain carbon pricing schemes, which Ravi mentioned as a kind of transition credit, is very much critical. So that is what the Japanese government is pushing for in the context of Asia region, together with other enabling mechanisms such as blended finance joined by Asian Development Bank or the JICA, that is the Development Agency in Japan, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, that the kind of economic logic will prevail. So while we need to pay proper heed to the alignment with net zero transition pathway, but at the end of the day, what moving the real project is the economic logic and risk return formula. So that's certainly what we have learned from our efforts to push ahead with transition finance in the region.
Great, thank you for that. Just a couple of quick follow-on questions. So I remember back in 2021 in discussions with the G7 ministers, we managed to get everyone, including Japan, to agree to not finance any more new coal internationally. So I guess the first question from my side is that has that held? Is that still the case? And the second issue then is that, I mean, you've talked about some of the mechanisms to support other countries in the region. How confident are you that actually we are going to see a sort of orderly energy transition in Southeast Asia? Because, I mean, the reality is that that is a region where unless you deal with the issue of clean energy, emissions are basically going to go through the roof in a global context.
Yeah, certainly that the commitment to not using the coal is still firmly held, I believe, at least in the ASEAN region and Japan, Korea. But certainly Asian region is facing a difficult job because, as I said, that they are still heavily dependent on the coal. And moving ahead, there needs to be a kind of a total revamp of the grid system. That requires huge finance. So, but because the current grid accommodates so much coal-fired power, some European investors view that investing in revamp of grid as a brown project. So that's where the transitional finance play a critical role. And when I talked with the many Asian authorities, they certainly are aware of the need for move ahead for climate transition. So I'm personally pretty confident that the things would move ahead in a few years' time. But certainly it requires a proper arrangement of transition finance mechanism so that the necessary project would receive a proper amount of financing for climate transition.
Great, thank you for that. That's encouraging. Alistair, can I turn back to home, to the UK? So I said at the start of this discussion that obviously the government's now come out with this industrial strategy, talking about reducing energy costs for industry over a sort of 10-year period, and aligning that to sort of our domestic politics. So, you know, one of the arguments that's made by those who don't believe in this agenda is that somehow renewables are driving up energy prices. Can you help us debunk that particular myth, firstly? But secondly, I mean, from your perspective, do you think more needs to be done to bring down not just energy prices for industry, but actually households as well?
Sure. Okay, two really good questions. So I think currently, if we look at the sources of energy that we have in the UK, you can indeed build wind farms, offshore wind farms, far cheaper than the current wholesale price. So there's no doubt that renewables, one, not offering the flexibility that some sources of energy do, you can definitely get it cheaper. I think equally we've seen with nuclear, although nuclear is obviously a low carbon source of power and has its place, every single type of generation that we've got is going up in price. So, originally we had the original nuclear contract at £92.50 in 2012 prices. The last auction cleared in this country at just under £60. Indeed, we're building the world's biggest offshore wind farm at just over £40 on the same basis. And so I think we will see prices continue to rise, but I suspect those nuclear prices will also go much higher when we get to the next round with Sizewell or whatever, if somebody puts that pounds per megawatt on it. That the last major piece of flexible generation kit built in the UK, we built at Keadby 2, which is about 10% more efficient than any other plant in the UK. Now, when we built that, we paid a bit under 400 million for it. Today, I think it'd probably go north of 900 million for the same piece of plant. It's difficult to even get access to that. So I think the costs of everything are rising. And for the UK, and all of Europe, we don't have the options to frack gas like they do in America. America's going to have reasonably cheap gas, a third or a quarter of the price that we're seeing in Europe at the moment, and that will happen for a good period of time. But fracking just doesn't happen elsewhere. We have to build the sources of energy that we have control of, and it's certainly been a huge turnaround in American fortunes over the last 15, 20 years, that rather than having carrier groups stationed in the Middle East trying to work out how they get enough oil and gas out of there and other places, they've now become a major producer of that. So for us, it's definitely, as I said earlier, wind in Northern Europe, solar in Southern Europe, and then possibly a scattering of nuclear for those people who want to do it. And then the more expensive stuff will be the flexible things. But at some point, if you invest in this, we saw offshore wind come down over 60% in price, partly doing your time in government as Secretary of State. You've got to invest in these technologies to bring down the prices, and obviously one of the key things is get some of the investment in the UK as well. So I think that's the first bit. I think obviously affordability of prices for consumers, prices will come down on the 1st of July. They're down by about 7 or 8%. I think pre the activities over the weekend, we saw prices continue to come down as well this decade. There's a lot more LNG coming on board. Gas is clearly a big transition fuel for all sorts of people. So I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic around being able to hit the sort of predictions around prices coming down out to 2030. But a key part of it is not to expose ourselves to, I know in 2022 we estimate the difference between the energy system of 2030 and the one we had in 2022 was worth about £30 billion to consumers off bills. That's the critical thing. Get the prices to come down a little bit, which they are, and then keep them down by having our own homegrown sources.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm going to ask the same question to both Julian and Natalie, and maybe Julian, you might want to go sort of first on this, which is that what does the UK financial service sector want from government to make it easier for them to deploy transition capital? And I mean, Natalie talked about some of those, but I'd be interested in your views. And then the other issue is the role of having a sort of credible transition plan. How important is that in terms of people being willing to lend to you on if you're looking at transition finance?
Thank you. Yeah, so I've kind of decided that I can't say they want money, because public funding in general, I think we'd also have to work around that. So, and Natalie did touch on it. So clearly, certainty, confidence, commitment in one bucket. Industrial strategy is probably helpful with that. Sector-specific action plans will be helpful. Just anything that provides some level of confidence over what is going to happen in the slightly longer term, I think super helpful. The second bucket I would go through is just partnering. And so, there's a fair few initiatives, clearly. TCF, we've got the Global Clean Power Alliance. We have also the recently launched Investor Task Force. Yes. So I think those are really helpful for both defining the partner stack and the capital stack. And what do I mean by that? And a lot of people have talked about this today. You get groups of different businesses working together to try to mobilize the funding. They're not often groups that are used to working together. They maybe have different objectives and things like that. So understanding, codifying the different partner stacks required to mobilize the capital, I think, is really important, as is the capital stack, because again, that's very different depending on what you're doing. So We talk a bit about investable NDCs in different countries having that. It'd be great to start to think about what that looks like, because we go to a lot of conferences and people talk about what does financial services need, blah, blah, blah. Maybe start to move towards, you know, what is an investable NDC playbook? And then for the initiatives that are driving this, you know, what does a capital stack look like? So how do we actually execute on it, I think is really, really, really critical. And one thing that we mentioned when we were preparing for this panel, which I think is also worth us really thinking about, is engagement with the population. We still talk about it in a really technical fashion, and it really isn't engaging for most of the British population. Right. So how are we going to change the narrative? How are we making it more exciting? How are we going to make everybody feel like this is something that's needed, rather than something that's left to the technical experts?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sort of building what Jill said, it really is projects that are de-risked and making sure that we can sort of bring in all the players who are able to sort of take slices of this risk, and probably slicing and dicing risk these projects differently than we have done before. I mean, the National Wealth Fund, UKF, they've all got roles to play. And once we know where the government wants to go, there's certainty and clarity around it. A bit like what, you know, okay, it's taken a few years now around Teesside, what's happening there. Then we can start to sort of deploy. These are huge numbers that we have to crowd in a blended finance way. And, you know, even a small grant can make a difference on the equity component of it. And then the blended finance is critical. So it's the alignment, the rule of law has to apply, and the support as well. Less so the aggregation factor in the UK.
Very good.
And I was going to say, you also mentioned, sorry to interrupt, but...
This is the best kind of panel, they just talk amongst themselves.
Out of control. No, but you also mentioned regulation.
Yes.
And I didn't pick up on the transition plan. So I think as well, just to add in, so the reporting and disclosure regulation, greenwashing regulation, and I mean, I'm sure you would say this, but information on a corporate's transition plan and the means, if they have a credible decarbonisation target and ambition, and then they build a transition plan off the back of that. I'm imagining that's quite helpful.
I mean, it's very important to us. We have over 1 million corporate clients. We need, just from a prudential perspective and managing on our own risk, we need to know that these corporates are going to be sort of viable in the future and competitively advantaged by their transition plans. So the amount of work and investment that we've put in internally to be able to sort of effectively digitize getting transition questionnaires done, getting scores out of that, granular detail on their sort of plans, so we know how we can sort of help and lean in and help the sort of the transition. Back to your point, it's just not going to be linear.
Sergi, can I just turn back to you? Just talking about transition plans, where are the big Japanese corporates in terms of their transition plans?
Certainly. Actually, among the business corporates, that the devising the transition plan is certainly popular right now in Japan. Actually, in the introduction of emission trading system in Japan from 2 years from now, probably, there will be a certain mandatory requirement for devising transition plan for mandatory participants for emission trading system. So we connect the emission trading system with the requirement of transition plan, so that, as I explained earlier, that there would be a proper mix of the transition finance measures and the carbon pricing measures. And so, but at the end of the day, that those kind of a trend has been facilitated by the Japanese government's efforts to design the sector roadmaps or sector plans for hard-to-abate sectors, how actually they would make a climate transition in coming years and decades. So that is pretty much linked with the government efforts and the government's program, which includes certain subsidies amounting to 20 trillion yen, which effectively means 100 billion UK sterling So those kind of ecosystem will eventually enable the transition planning by business firms and financial institutions. So without those other measures in place, it is a bit tall order for a business firm to ask them to come up with the credible transition plan. So I think it is very critical to have a government strategy, government policy in place so that business firms are comfortably going along with that kind of thing. And that also applies to the in the context of region, because actually Japanese businesses value chain span across the Asian region. So actually when they design the transition plan, they require government strategy in the region, in the countries in the region. So that's where we are struggling. So that's why I would say the partnership with the countries in the Asian region is critical, so that the Japanese businesses can come up with a credible transition plan based on the credible government plan in the region.
Great, thank you for that. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got time for maybe one, maybe two questions from the floor. If anyone has a burning question, and a question please rather than a long statement. Any questions? No? We've stunned you, have we? Okay, yeah, we've got a question. Is there a mic? Sorry, can we turn the microphone on? Turn on the mic. Good shout.
So I've heard a lot about steel and coal and various financial initiatives, but I haven't heard much about artificial intelligence, which has the potential to really explode our energy use and challenge everything. I just wondered whether people had some comment about that.
Yeah, good question. Data centers. Who wants to talk about data centers?
I can
okay, please.
have a crack and everybody will build in. I think data centers are going to be actually critical. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. The energy demand is going to be sort of huge. The hyperscalers are much less sensitive to energy price. And what they're really wanting is really resilient, consistent, reliable energy. So like you've seen in the US, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, look at sort of unmothballing the nuclear, probably sort of private energy supplies. So they're less sensitive. But in terms of the advantage of clean, efficient data centers and AI in the role that that's going to play on getting to net zero in an orderly or disorderly fashion, absolutely critical. You're just not going to have the necessary sort of smart grids without it, and we need the smart grids. You're not going to have precision agriculture without data and AI. From a bank perspective, we're not going to understand the first, second, third, fourth order impacts of physical risk without data and AI. So these data centers, maybe on one side of the equation, look like they're going to be a sort of a major sort of force for energy demand, but on the other side, they're actually going to be super and essential to hit net zero, which is why it's one of our priority areas to sort of focus on.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, so I'll be reasonably brief. I didn't really touch on demand, but demand in Europe is anemic at best, generally, for electricity, although there is significant growth in renewables and low carbon generation backing that up. That's partly because of costs in Europe, so the underlying real economy, which is quite strong in the US because of cheap energy prices, is probably being supported by data centers, things of that nature, and we really see that in somewhere like Ireland, which has a huge penetration of data centers. I do think you made the point about them not being terribly price sensitive. What we are seeing is that those hyperscalers on the positive side, because they're willing to go out into the market and they are funding a lot of green projects, virtually every piece of kit that we're building anywhere in Europe, we've got hyperscalers interested in taking contracts from them. And as they're less price sensitive, that drives investment and innovation in technologies and can drive us to continue deploying more green projects at the moment than we might otherwise, because of the desire for that. I think you're absolutely right in terms of what you say about industry and society generally will benefit hugely from AI and the adoption of it. But I think equally we'll see hyperscalers driving some innovation and driving more build in the renewable sector because they have a huge desire ultimately to get to 24/7 green, so flexible green energy.
Great. Well, we've only got a minute and a half left, so I'm going to ask one last question from our panel. So very briefly, tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is a totally orderly transition and 1 is, oh my God, it's really not very orderly, where do you think? Where do you think it's going to go? And please don't say 5, because that's boring. 10 totally orderly, 1 not orderly at all. Who would like to start? Alistair, do you want to start?
Fine. Look, I'd like to say 6 or 7, but at the moment we're in the 3 or 4 bracket. You know, it's definitely a little bit more bumpy and choppy. And so ultimately, probably, given what I've seen recently, I'm less than 5. It will just be bumpy and choppy, and people have to flex.
Okay.
I'm 3 or 4. But I'm optimistic that we can be suitably agile and need to be suitably agile to sort of find the sweet spots.
Okay.
I'm going to say 6. I have huge concerns, but we recently did a survey of 200 executives and board members across European corporates, and this is the first time that they've really started to talk about the benefits and the commerciality of sustainability to their businesses, particularly in product innovation, which I think is fabulous, but then also the stability of their businesses themselves. So, yeah.
So, Toshi, what number do you give it?
I agree with a 3 or 4 rating, but I hope for 6.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I think you've averaged that out, we come to 5. Ladies and gentlemen, can you